I volunteered to go to Vietnam. And over there I got involved in some units that did horrible things. We saw children being used as weapons. We saw our own guys getting killed and butchered, and even to the point of their privates being cut off and stuck in their mouth. And we witnessed all of this stuff, so it changed our opinion on what was right and what was wrong. I'm Tom Winchell, and this is my transformation story. I was born in Saginaw, Michigan in 1949, October 31st. And I was a product of a broken home. My parents divorced when I was 2. I was one of those every other weekend kids, and I really didn't know where home was. Without a father figure, a stable father figure, I kept on getting into trouble. It seems like trouble followed me wherever I went, and to the point where the only male that I had trusted when I was 12 years old sexually abused me. I became increasingly defiant to my mother, who was a very strict disciplinarian. She would ground me all the time, make me stay inside. And so when I turned 17, she signed papers for me to go in the service so they could make a man out of me. I was trained very well by the military to kill, and I did a good job of it. So when I got out of the service, all of the terrible things that I witnessed, all of the terrible things that I did as a paratrooper over there, as an infantryman, I was trying to escape those thoughts, and I didn't know that I needed help. I got into taking all sorts of drugs. I got tied in with another Vietnam veteran who had the connection to Texas and Mexico for the drug trade, and I got into dealing heavy. And I would hang out at the park every day looking for customers, and then this young lady went driving by, her and her sister, and all I would do is tip my head like that towards her, and she would say hi, and she would keep driving.
I am that young lady. My name is Esther Winchell. The thing to do after school was to drive around, go to the park, and hang out with your friends. On occasion, I'd see this man sitting on a picnic table, and he just looked lonely. So I'd wave and he would nod. That was the routine. The next day it was going to school and going back to the park. He would sit at the same table and nod, and I would wave. I didn't speak to him because my sister said, "You're not supposed to talk to anybody out here that you don't know." But then I went home and told my mother about this lonely, lost, skinny man. So she prepared a lunch and she said, "Take this to him."
And then a couple more days or a couple more weeks, she would drive by again, and she would bring me food because she could see I was hungry. I probably weighed 130 pounds at the time.
The more I talked to him at the park, the more my sister made it a point to tell my father that I was talking to someone at the park. So my dad said, "Bring him home. We need to meet him." I brought him home, and the first thing my mom said was, "He's way too skinny." But my grandmother said, "He looks very lost and lonely." Make a long story short, at first I felt sorry for him. I didn't know how to help him. I wanted to help him. So we just kept inviting him to church. And he went one time, reluctantly.
I was raised in a Presbyterian church. It was a pretty large church, but it wasn't a personable church. It was just a matter of my mother telling me, we're going to church, so I would go to church.
And the one time, the pastor said, "Whoever brought the visitor, thanks for bringing him, but next time he comes, make sure he gets a haircut." And to my surprise, I said, "Oh, I can't tell him that because he'll never come back." But my grandmother behind me just held her finger to her lips and said, "They said that they were glad to see you and hope you come back really soon." I looked at my grandmother, and I think that's the first time I heard her tell a little white lie.
And this family had reached out to me and took me in and introduced me to the Lord. And I fought it. I didn't think I needed anything. But there was a big hollow spot inside of me. And this family treated me better than my own family. I was almost 5 years older than this young lady. So everybody was accusing me of being a dirty old man. But she had this little grandma. Little grandma was only about 4.5 feet tall.
So we fell in love after 3 years, and we got married. But during that time, I didn't know what I was getting into because I didn't know the side of him that he had never revealed to me.
It was a dangerous time for people around me. They didn't know me. They didn't know what I was capable of. The civilian out there had never pulled that trigger. It changes you for life. You're not the same person anymore when you take a life, or many lives.
There were times when he would experience a nightmare and actually hold his forearm to my throat and tell me to be quiet. I know now that it was only God that kept me quiet, because I found out later that if you startle somebody that is suffering from PTSD, it can trigger and cause greater damage. So I remained quiet, and he would just go back to sleep.
When I was in Vietnam, I picked up a cigarette lighter, and it had, "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, because I am the evilest so-and-so in the valley." And I didn't know then that that was even scripture. But because of my training, because of who I was at that time, I was the evilest person in the valley. You couldn't touch me. You couldn't hurt me. I had gone through 18 months of combat and barely got a scratch. So when my attitude when I came back was, I was indestructible. And I was short fused. I was still angry at that time. People would I'd walk into a restaurant, and if somebody looked at me too long, I'd walk right over and ask him, "Do you know me? You don't want to know me."
I became afraid of him and afraid for our kids. And my grandmother was my confidant, my shoulder to cry on. I would tell her about these things, and she says, "We need to just pray and continue to pray for Tom." She would come over and anoint our home, anoint his side of the bed, and just pray over our home, over our room.
She would tell Esther to keep praying, get on your knees and pray. Because I fought it. I did not want to go to church. I didn't think church had anything for me.
I tried to remain strong when he was around, but then I started seeing fits of rage, of anger that would just trigger him to just fly off the handle. And during those times in our life, I just kept telling him he needed to really come to know Jesus. And he fought it, and he fought it. And I would go to church crying with my kids. And my grandmother one day just said, "Why are you crying?" She says, "Get on your knees and pray. It's in God's time, it's not in our time."
It took almost 7 years from the time we got married for her to convince me that I needed to change.
So one morning we're getting up ready for church. The kids are ready and Tom is sitting at the table. And I says, "You're all dressed, where are you going?" And he says, "Haven't you been asking me to go to church with you?" My heart was just, it still causes me emotion because it was the answer to prayer. He would go to church with us, but he never committed himself. It was just going to church with his family. I know it was kind of difficult because we were a Hispanic church and services were just in Spanish. So it was a blessing when Brother Davila came because he switched it to bilingual services, and now Tom could understand.
And it was a sermon by Pastor Dan Davila that hit me, that slapped me in the face, telling me that I needed the Lord.
And I remember when he told me, "I want to be baptized and give my life to Christ." He told me that on the way home from church after a sermon, and I said, "We have to go to my mom's house." And we went there and we walked through the door, and I don't know how my grandma knew, but she looked at me and she said, "He's decided."
And so I got baptized. It took 7 years of them working on me. I was hard-headed, and the Lord changed my life from that point on.
I can honestly say that I noticed the nightmares subsiding. Some of his fears weren't as great. He wouldn't walk around our house checking the house. He wouldn't double lock the doors. He wouldn't fly off the handle like he used to. It was a more calmer, peaceful Tom. So I know that God was working on his heart. God was working inside of him. And I just know that the Tom I met washing his hands in the dirt is not the same Tom. I saw his life transformed into one of wanting to serve the Lord.
I felt useless. I felt worthless. I felt guilty. I felt that I was no use to anybody. And the Lord gave me worth. He said, "You need to come to me." And I'm telling you this because no matter where you are, the Lord can use you. No matter where you've been, the Lord can pick you up and bring you back to where you should be.